Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I am Manleen Kaur, and today I will be introducing my new show, Kisaani Haqq. I will be touching upon issues regarding the biggest peaceful protests for the farmers' rights happening in Delhi to date. There have been several arrests and allegations surrounding this protest and not enough coverage by the media, but I'm here to change that. This has caused a lot of confusion in the Sangat about what the laws surrounding the bills that the Indian government is trying to implement. On today's panel, I have Jaskanwar Singh, a history student, Manjot Singh, a junior doctor based in the West Midlands, and Updesh Singh, founder of the Echo Chamber podcast. Jas, could you please shed some light on these laws?
Thank you, Mandy. Of 2020, the government of India passed three bills, now acts, that are supposedly going to favour the farmers of India. These acts were passed undemocratically according to the Indian opposition parties, as the acts were passed by a voice vote instead of a division of votes, as requested by the opposition parties. The three bills are Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement of Price Assurance and Farm Services Act 2020, Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act 2020, and the Essentials Commodities Act 2020. So individually, Act 1 allows contract farming, allowing farmers to enter into agreements with agri firms, exporters, and large buyers of produce for a predetermined, pre-agreed price. However, it must be noted that no law before this act prevented farmers from going into contracts with agri-firms, exporters, or large buyers. Act 2 allows interstate selling of farm produce. Please also note that before this law, there were no laws preventing interstate sales. Interstate sale is not a viable thing in India. Poor farmers are finding it hard enough to get to the local mundis to sell their produce. Traveling any further is next to impossible. No farmer will travel out of state due to the cost they'll have to bear, and with fuel prices hitting 100 rupees here in India, that cost has risen. The third act allows the stocking of food without fears of being prosecuted for hoarding. This will allow corporations to create fake create fake demand, increasing the prices for the everyday person in India. The BJP government is adamant that these laws will empower small, poor farmers by allowing them access to greater markets. The opposition, led by the Congress party and farmers all over India, disagree. They know the laws threaten to abolish MSP, the MSP being the minimum support price, therefore leaving farmers at the mercy of corporations.
Thank you for that. So, in regards to these laws, some people may be of the opinion that these laws are in favor of the farmers as it provides an open market. How would you respond to this?
Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting and good question. So the first time I actually looked at these laws, I read them for myself. I thought, you know what, these sound like a good reform, but it's only when you start to look a bit deeper into it that you realize that they will produce either some intended or unintended consequences for the farmers, which are not in the farmers' interest. So, for example, the Act One, like Jazz highlighted earlier, shows that the Act will expand the scope of trade for the farmers' produce to outside the Mundy system to private players. But the issue with this is that the Mundis are a very regulated system. They have a system of MSP, which is for people listening that don't know, is in the minimum support price that the farmers are guaranteed to have, and that essentially ensures their livelihoods. But if they are then setting outside the Mundy system, what will eventually happen is, or what the farmers are concerned about, is that the Mundy system will eventually become obsolete, and as a result of that, the Mundy system will lose its funding infrastructure, and eventually it will no longer function as it did. And the farmers are concerned that once the Mundy system is gone, they will be forced to sell to private players solely, and the private players, as a result, will be able to decide the market, decide the price, and hence why there are concerns that the farmers will eventually be under the mercy of the corporations. So that's one of the major concerns. and I think it's a very, very valid concern as well. And that's why the farmers have been insistent on making MSP part of the negotiations and making it part of the part of a sort of written agreement at the very least. So that's Act One. Um, Another interesting thing to note is a chap called Dilip Mohit Patel, who is a president of a federation of Maharashtra's 306 APMCs or Mundis, uh, said that since the central ordinance was announced in mid 2020, 100 to 125 Mundis in Maharashtra have gone have been so underfunded and so underused that they are close to shutting down. So that's an example within India itself, where if these kind of bills are in place and are being passed, what the results will be. Once the Mundis are shut down, as I said, the private players will have a lot more power, and they can decide a lot more in terms of what the prices should be going forward, and that is a big risk to farmers and their livelihoods.
I would like to just jump in and ask, like, it could be argued that this Mundy system has worked so far. Why change it? Would you agree that it has worked so far? How do you feel about that?
So I think everyone who's been following the system of agriculture in India and Punjab knows that there are some sort of reforms that are required, and that's highlighted with
Mm.
the level of farmer debt, farmer suicide over the past few decades. Um, the problem is that these bills don't seek to reform a lot of the issues that are there, and eventually they will lead to, like I said, intended or unintended consequences that will harm farmers in the long term rather than benefit them. Um, Another such thing that Jas touched upon earlier is removing in Act Three. It essentially allows private players like big retailers, big companies, to hoard foods and stockpile them. So, for example, it essentially removes foods such as cereals, pulses from essential commodities, and as a result of that, private companies will be able to hoard these foods. So, for example, they can buy these foods in big amounts when the prices are very cheap. So, for example, during the harvest periods, and stockpile them as much as they want. And later on, when the prices rise, the prices increase, and the farmers want to sell at a higher price as per the market, they won't be able to because the private players, they don't necessarily have to enter the market at that stage. They don't have to buy anything when it's high because they've already stockpiled previously. So as a result of this, what will eventually end up happening is the private players make a lot of money, save a lot of money, and the farmers themselves will lose, and that risks their livelihoods going forward. And I think that's one of the major concerns as well. The other concern
Mhm.
regarding Act Three is the fact that there's a genuine security concern, food security concern. We've seen in other parts of the world, for example, in places like Kenya, in other parts of India as well. If the government goes away from the procurement and distribution of food themselves, and then it opens up to private corporations to kind of manipulate the market as they wish, hoard foods, stockpile foods, and a sort of black market for food grains opens up. And as a result of these concerns, there are genuine concerns there which bring forth problems with food security going forward.
So, are we feeling so far that the Mundy system is a failed system, hence why these bills have been applied and introduced? Is this what we generally feel?
Disagree. I wouldn't
So
say the Mundy system is failing in India. It's up to fail, however. But, there are concerns with the middleman in the current APMC Mundy system in India. You have to understand farmers. This middleman can become, an instant source of money in a time of need. And though there are some concerns that do need reforming with the middleman, the majority do feel that having the middleman is a better option than getting rid of the APMC Mundy and having only the private corporation Mundy. And the reason why I said the APMC Mundy is being set up to fail and that it's not failed now is because these new laws will mean that the current Mundy system will now be taxed, and your trading between be taxed. So in order to save money, the reality is people will go to these private players, and eventually, like as Manjul Singh said, we can see in India where due to the lack of funding, and the lack of usage, these mandis are closing down. That's going to be the reality all over India. When no one's going to this mandi, which now you have to pay tax for, it's they're going to crumble. Uh,
Yeah.
and like yeah, so like these bills seem good. These bills seem amazing. Where these farmers are allowed to get into contract with these corporations. And but farmers have a real concern where they'll be exploited. And in Gujarat, that we've seen this happen, firsthand, where PepsiCo, the company that creates Lay's, a very well-known chips in India, they they fined two farmers 1 crore because they planted a different variation of potatoes. It was only when there was an uproar that this case was then taken back from the court, and that's the reality that most people are. And the governments also, as part of these laws, have said, you're not going to come to the court. We're going to set up a committee. There's going to be a bench of people, a gathering of people that you will have to take your concerns up to. And in a country like India, where without a doubt, a lot of corruption. Um, this committee, this sitting that will be created can easily be bought by the person that has money. And in a farmer corporation relationship, the person who has money is the private player. And though these prices may be attractive to start with, which is why farmers will be heading towards these private players, Simrat Kaur Badal made an excellent point in Parliament, where she said, when India was introduced to Geo, a company of Reliance, which provided free data for a couple of years in India. Everyone did go to that. Everyone was helped out, but as soon as that free data, gift, sorry, promotion expired, was over, we saw a hike in prices, and we also saw the destruction of other network providing companies, and that's going to
Yeah.
happen with the farming, the agriculture sector of India, and that is there are real examples in India's recent history, which is why farmers are wary of such laws. Though they do seem good on paper, in reality, in a country like India, they won't work. India is not ready for such laws.
Okay. Updesh, I wanted to get your opinion on this. This has been logged as one of the biggest protests to date. How do you feel the response to this protest has been so far since it's
Um,
began?
so I would say that in terms of from the people and the people who have been observing the things that have been going on in India from the diaspora, as well as people who who don't have ties to India at all, has been largely positive. I would say a lot of people are in support of the farmers, and they think that these bills are very much been put in place to make lives harder for the farmers in the sense that the protections are stripped away. A lot of them are one bad season away from losing everything. I am not sure on exact figures, but I'm fairly certain that a significant population of farmers in India have less than half a football field's worth of land. So it is a very, very dire situation. That's the reason why the farmer suicides are so high and the debts are so high. I would say that in the media, especially coming from India, which has one of the worst press freedoms in the world, um, I think it's 141 out of 190 countries, but I'm not too sure exactly what position it is. It has been to very much make these protests out to be illiterate farmers that don't really understand the bills, or separatists that are now trying to trick farmers and the people into essentially supporting a separatist movement, which really isn't the case. And I think that the reason they've done that is very much to derail what the protests are originally about. So we saw in October 250 million people went on strike. That is the largest strike in human history. And they still will try and say that this is a Sikh issue, this is a Sikh separatist issue, and a lot of the imagery you see are of Sikh farmers. Now, I'm not going to deny that there is a heavy Sikh presence in these protests,
Yeah.
but there's only like 30 million people, 30 million Sikhs in the world. If it was a
Yeah.
Sikh issue, why would 250 million people be protesting?
I guess it
That's a
could
very
be
good point.
argued. Sorry, Manjot.
Sorry, I'm just going to add to what Updesh was saying. Essentially, it's in terms of the scale of the protest, it's been an absolutely massive, unprecedented protest. Like
Mhm.
Updesh said, in October or November, there was a general Indian strike in which 250 million people, it's estimated, participated. And if those figures are correct, that would make it the largest single protest in human history, which is absolutely huge. And the government has maintained this narrative of these are illiterate farmers who are misinformed, they're misled. When you look at it, 250 million people protested on that day. There's hundreds of thousands of Kisans sitting on the borders of Delhi right now. We've got multiple countries hosting protests as well. There's been protests all over the world. There's been protests in Australia, New Zealand, the UK, the USA, Canada, and there's been multiple protests in each of these countries. And even the ex-chief economist of the World Bank came forward and publicly stated that these bills have genuine, legitimate concerns. There's legitimate things wrong with them, and we need to examine those. So I think this narrative that's been peddled by the Indian government repeatedly, that these are misled, misinformed farmers, is actually very patronizing. It's very disingenuous and, frankly, very disrespectful as well.
I'd like to add to all of this, we tend to forget that yes, it's a protest, but it's also the world's biggest peaceful protest. That's a really important point I'd like to put across to the Sangat and everyone who's watching this. It's not just a protest. There's not been any violence from these farmers. When you look at the news reports, no matter what the media is trying to show you, we have to remember that our elders are sitting there in Delhi right now. And they're sitting there knowing that these bills might not even affect them. They're doing it for the oncoming generations. And they're sitting there doing it peacefully. It's just one of the points that I really just wanted to put across.
Definitely, I'd
Now,
agree. I'd agree. That's a very important part to focus on, especially when a lot of the media coverage, unfortunately, has been focused on the certain points in the protest where there's been, for example, use of tear gas and lathi charges, and then some farmers have potentially done things back as well. But the vast
yeah,
majority, 99.9% of the protests have been very peaceful. The
mhm.
farmers have been on the streets of Delhi for over 2 months now, nearing 3 months. And there has been any major acts of violence committed, and I think that's an important thing to focus on. And unfortunately, a lot of the parts of the Indian media have not shown that adequately. And unfortunately, the response from the Indian government and the police towards the peaceful protesters has been extremely concerning. When the farmers from Punjab and Haryana initially went to Delhi towards the end of November, they started the Delhi Chalo movement. They were met with all sorts of barricades, tear gas, water cannons, roads being dug up. And bear in mind, these are peaceful protesters that were being attacked in this way. In a well functioning, robust democracy, the right to freedom of expression, the right to peaceful protest is paramount. And the fact that the government reacted in this way to peacefully protesting farmers that were planning to go to their own nation's capital to protest is extremely concerning, and I think that needs to be highlighted a lot.
I think the thing that we tend to kind of also not really think about is that when you have such a large number of people protesting, you're not going to be able to control who's going to be attracted to this movement. And obviously there may be isolated incidents of violence, but it is usually, as we can tell, in retaliation to tear gas being used, water cannons, lathi charges, all of that stuff. I think the other thing is that these protests, as soon as they got to Delhi, started performing functions of the state that the state has been neglecting. For example, setting up food systems for the underprivileged in Delhi, for example, through the actions of Langar, teaching kids that hadn't been taught by the state. There's loads of different services that these farmers themselves have now set up in Delhi itself that the government had chose not to do. And I think that's a really, really major point that the media has chosen not to highlight, because it does really humanize these farmers even more than they already are.
Okay, so we're coming towards the end of our first segment. Is there any last comments from my panel that they'd like to put across? Manjot?
I think the main thing I'd like to say is a lot of what's been said in the media, and unfortunately from the government's point of view, is to paint this into a movement which it is not. So the protesting farmers came to Delhi with one ultimate goal, and that was to repeal the 3 black laws which threatened their livelihood. And they've been met with accusations of communism, of separatism, of all sorts of violence. And these accusations have been done as a result with the aim of derailing the movement. And so it's very important that we, as people who are supporting the movement, are following this movement, don't play into these hands. We stay focused on the issue, and the issue is the repealing of these 3 black laws, and we should support the farmers in this goal as much as we can. Thank you.
Joss, is there anything that you'd like to say at the end of our segment?
I'd like to urge everyone watching to please read the 3 laws, read into the history of Indian agriculture, read into the Green Revolution, try and understand, the implications of these bills, so we can better assist our mothers and fathers sat at the borders of Delhi protesting. It's crucial that we understand these laws, so we're better able to challenge these laws. There are people who are adamant that these laws are helpful. The better read we are, the better we'll be able to counter these false narratives. Thank you, Mundy.
Brilliant. Uppy?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that I don't think anyone has any misconceptions that reforms are needed to the system of agriculture in India. The Kisaani themselves have been asking for it for decades. But with the Mundy system, I think even if there is corruption, even if there is if it's not as efficient as it could be, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think that's exactly what these bills are doing. They have been passed undemocratically without actually engaging with the people that they affect the most, and that is because and these people will be overexploited by essentially what I can only describe as capitalism on steroids. This is peak neoliberalism, and as we've seen in the past 50 years, it's always the poorest that get affected the worst.
I'd like to thank you all for your thoughts today, and thank you for the Sangat for tuning in. I look forward to seeing everyone next week. Thank you. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.